I'm Blake Hargreaves, and this is FutureStops. The meditative sounds you hear are the work of American composer and performer Kali Malone. Based in Stockholm, Malone's serene, entrancing music encompasses different tuning systems, arrangements for organ with voices, strings, and modular synthesizer. Today on Future Stops, we talk about her much celebrated 2019 album, The Sacrificial Code, the path that led to its creation, and how what she's working on now connects back to her roots as a young musician.
So I grew up singing, and I went to an arts high school in Denver. There I met a lot of different artists, and all of my friends were quite older than me. And I got into experimental music and noise music and hardcore. And but I was always training singing classical music at that point. But yeah, then when I moved to Western Massachusetts, I got into experimenting with tapes and pedals and using my voice and getting really into free improvisation. I had a duo with the darkroom professor at the school that I was going to named John Snyder. He was in his 60s and I was 16, and we became best friends. And we were playing music in the basement of the lecture hall at the school, and people would climb down into the window wells to listen to us. Yeah, he was really influential on me. He gave me like first Cocteau Twins cassettes, and actually he was playing a show in Hudson, New York, and I had to get a fake ID to go to the show. And so I went to New York City, and I was trying to get an ID so I could go see him play. And then I got invited to go to this house show, and I met Ellen Arkbro there. And she's this amazing Swedish musician and composer. And I was 16 and she was 21 maybe. And it was her first time ever in the States, and we just like had this magnetic attraction. And I went to go visit her maybe a year later in Stockholm, and she introduced me to all of her friends, and something happened when I met her and her community. And her community was primarily focused on free jazz and electroacoustic music, and it was kind of this eye-opening experience of how to listen and communicate with each other in a very sober and respectful way. Because in the US, my whole experience with experimental music was really centered around this social party like attitude that kind of goes along with a high energy show in a warehouse.
Malone's trip to Stockholm when she was 17 at the invitation of Ellen Arkbro was not just a shift in energy around the experience of listening to music. It is also what started her on the path to composing music for the pipe organ.
I definitely was exposed to the organ through Ellen. When Ellen was writing her piece for organ and brass, there was also our friend Marta Forsberg, who was writing a piece on the same mean tone organ at the German church in Stockholm. And I remember going to that concert and I was just weeping at the end. It was so, so beautiful. But I didn't start working with the organ until I was in my doing my bachelor's thesis when I was studying at the Royal College of Music in Stockholm. I was writing a lot about tuning systems and just intonation, and I wanted to learn more about organ tuning. So I went to interview an organ tuner named Jan Börjesson. He originally I had to go into the suburbs of Stockholm and visit him at a church he was working at. And he said, okay, I have 15 minutes to talk to you, but it's a really big job I have to do today. So just a short interview, and we got along so well. I think we spent 8 hours together that day, and I ended up tuning the organ with him, and it was, yeah, just this amazing bond we had over tuning and the phenomena of sound. And so I ended up apprenticing for him and working with him for a couple of years. We would travel around Sweden to different churches and very rural areas and fix the organs and tune them. Yeah, I learned so much about listening. I already had been developing my listening skills a lot through working with just intonation over the years. And oh yeah, but when we started working together, that was when I started playing the organ. And I'm not a very good keyboard player. I grew up playing piano, but I was much more interested in the guitar and then later electronics. So I was studying electroacoustic music at the time, and I was making a lot of generative music in pure data. And so I just applied the same generative techniques that I was using in my compositions in pure data, basically to the organ. My idea of minimalist form is, I've never really defined this so clearly. I don't think it needs the clearest definition, because there's something quite poetic and individual about what every person would consider to be a minimalist or maximalist form. And obviously within a minimalist structure, there's like very massive macro experiences that come out of that. I guess for me, it would be really defining structural elements and creating a clarity in the composition that is not only clear to the composer, but clear to the listeners, that the listeners are invited into the intellectual and creative process of the composition, and not necessarily sitting at the edge of their chairs wondering what's going to happen around the corner. It's a sort of listening that it's understood what the sound world, what the compositional structure is at the moment of listening, and therefore the listener and yourself, you don't have to listen in an anticipatory way.
Malone's approach to minimalism, which embraces precision and explores ideas of process and structure, is given added depth by her use of tuning systems like just intonation, a tuning system she first experiments with on an entirely different instrument.
For me, working with just intonation, for me, that went hand in hand with working with minimalist structures, not only because of all the various traditional influences from 60s American minimalist music, but just the economy of notes when you're figuring out a sort of modality that you can use in just intonation, and depending on the instruments that you have. For me, I started working with just intonation mostly on the electric guitar. And so I would only be able to use the open strings and not the fretted, not be able to fret, obviously. So I had very few notes I could use. Okay, 6 notes plus the fifth harmonics. And so figuring out what characteristics I could create with these limitations of, okay, here's 6 pitches and there are various harmonics, and figuring out, yeah, the richness of experience that could emerge from a very seemingly limited musical choices is actually super vast. And this idea of quantity and quantity of of expressions and having, oh, I'll play this many notes, and it seemed as virtuoso. It's sort of this thing in classical contemporary classical music that composers should write many notes in their compositions to give the musicians a good bang for their buck. At least that's what I experienced when I was studying composition. Sort of idea that maybe musicians were a bit disappointed if there wasn't more information, more challenge, more quantity of Italian words and notes on the page to give them some more labor. And oftentimes I had the experience that I would give my scores to some musicians and they'd say, oh, it's super easy, great, this is all okay. But but then when it came to executing the music, it was actually much more difficult to achieve and pull off, and the sort of struggle in the mind to sit with something for longer than you're comfortable with. This is something I learned a lot from Pauline Oliveros's work. The challenge between maintaining your active listening and going beyond that urge to change, the sort of endurance seeking. And also she has this one piece that is hold a note for as long as you can stand it, and then once you can stand it, change it. And I loved just figuring out that timing of like, okay, I'm holding a note, I'm at 3 minutes and it's impossible, I want to change, my anxiety is overwhelmed, I really need to change notes. But then when I get to 7 minutes, I couldn't imagine any other note but this one. It's the most beautiful note in the world. There's so much complexity in the series. I've like completely have released myself to this note, and then at that moment is when you should change. The history of tuning is the history of dividing the syntonic comma over the octave. And the syntonic comma is the space between octaves that was developed with Pythagoras from tuning in perfect fifths out. And when you tune in perfect fifths out, the octaves slowly widen and widen, and you have this spiraling seashell type of formation that occurs. So if you're going to play, an A at a low octave and an A at 5 octaves higher, they're going to be different. They're not going to be in tune. But if you go in fourths and fifths up the octaves, those are going to be in tune when they're in the same octave. So this is an issue about making sound. Standardizing it in a certain way in order for, it's a technology for the evolution of music. And so various cultures in various times, there was different ways of stylistically distributing this comma and making certain notes absorb the comma, making them out of tune. In mean tone temperament, you have the wolf tone, which is a note in the octave that absorbs a majority of the comma in order to let other notes be more pure, like thirds and sixths. And basically, when we got to equal temperament, the wolf tone, this comma became equally distributed amongst every pitch in the 12-tone scale, except for the octave. So just intonation would be only using low number ratios in order to create completely periodic pitch. And there's almost an infinite amount of pitches that you can create in just intonation. So it's a very unique thing that people can create, is these harmonic experiences that are completely non-standardized and unique to themselves. And in many other cultures, it's quite obvious, especially in Arabic music and Hindustani music. It's like a no-brainer that you would do this, but for some reason in the West, it like became completely standardized, and it's like a lost technology now.
Malone's intricate experiments with just intonation are expressed with confidence and exuberance on her 2016 album Tragic Chorus, a triptych of pieces for guitars and just intonation and generative organ. The album was co-released by a label in her hometown of Denver, Colorado called Bleak Environment, which at the time was not known for releasing contemporary organ music.
Tragic Chorus. That music came about from, when I was finding this way of working with generative music and in Pure Data. And I was working with 4-voice harmony. And for every oscillator, I would create a unique spectrum. So I would choose every partial, and I wouldn't have more than 15 partials for every oscillator. And then I would have a set number of pitches, of adjust pitches that I would use. It would be around 6 pitches probably, and their octave variations. And then I would have every oscillator would have a different rhythmical duration, and then I would just go and see what emerged from that. At that time, I was together with a man from Denver, and he had this black metal and noise label called Bleak Environment. And so I was doing all of this, conceptual electroacoustic music, but and culturally, I was kind of split between this academic world in Stockholm, and then going back to where I'm from in Colorado, and being like really involved in that world. And all of my friends there were part of metal bands. I was living with the band Spectral Voice and Blood Incantation, and they were really interested in dungeon synth music and looking and finding, and that's kind of what they heard in that music at the time. And I thought that was super interesting to because it also paralleled with my interest in early music. And some of the compositional structures that I was using with the generative music was very similar to canonical structure, and just this idea that is in early music that is super restrictive compositional methods that are implied by that are imposed onto composers from the church or a feudal situation, and the limitations that composers and musicians had within these societies, and the music that resulted from that. So I was interested in those limitations and archetypes, and Tragic Chorus. I was making this music, or I don't know, experiments, and it resonated with that community, and so that was my first release. Was on this was with this justly tuned academic generative music, but on a black metal label. And so it sort of prompted this very interesting and fun collaboration with different musical cultures, and sort of finding these bridges and connections and inspirations between different communities of people, and finding the connections of thought and art there. I had released the tape with Ascetic House, Organ Dirges 2016 to 2017. And this was just this, as I mentioned earlier, was the sort of next step in realizing the generative structures, but on acoustic instruments. Yeah, so the Sacrificial Code was basically, I just had to explore those ideas more, because on Organ Dirges, when I made that, I had no idea I was making music. I was just recorded all of that on a Zoom, and it was this experimental thing I was doing. And then I sent it off to my friends at Ascetic House, and they put it out. And then suddenly there was all this interest in it. I was like, oh, I guess I have to start playing organ now. and so I really just went deeper into those ideas. And then I discovered this organ through Jan Börjesson. He was tuning this organ in a temperament called Kernberger 3, which is a late mean tone temperament. And it has pure thirds and C major. And then there's also several other pure intervals that you can achieve through there. And it's just so beautiful. And so I started composing pieces for that organ. And then during the same year, I visited my friend Carl Sjölund in Piteå in the north of Sweden. And he was working at the concert hall in Piteå called Acousticum. And there's a really beautiful, innovative pipe organ there that has a lot of different technological advancements, but one in particular that I was obsessed with was these potentiometers that you could adjust the air pressure on just certain pipes. So not the entire organ, which I had been doing previously on the Organ Dirges record. But so this was interesting because I could use the same pipes, the same 8-foot octave pipes, and I could assign the air pressure controls just to one of the pipes. So I was able to actually kind of work with this microtonal and dynamic swells while still maintaining the pitch on certain pipes. So I was pretty interested in dissecting canonical form in this way, because I had obviously first come across canonical forms in early religious music, like the music of, I think the first time I was really dissecting canonical forms was in the music of Josquin de Prez. And I found it so interesting to try to follow a single voice for as long as I could without looking at the score, and then just feeling completely lost. And even this music that is so rational in its construction, listening to it in a linear way is it's impossible. It's almost like if you think about, you can't sing more than one note at a time, and even thinking about harmony is very difficult. And thinking about the connection of this type of music that is performed in churches, and how these canonical structures also aid in the architectural structures of the church, and all of the adornments that go into providing a certain psychological effect on the person within the church and experiencing that music. Yeah, I was interested in investigating these techniques, but from a very different cultural place.
You're listening to the FutureStops podcast, an initiative of the Royal Canadian College of Organists. My name is Blake Hargreaves, and I'm your host as we explore the world of the 21st century organ. We just heard today's feature piece, The Spectacle of Ritual, from the 2019 album The Sacrificial Code, composed and performed by today's guest, Kali Malone. The album had a seismic impact upon its release and was a regular on year-end lists of reviewers and critics from many different genres, which, as we all know, is an impressive feat for organ music. As she continues to compose, Malone is once again delving into yet another tuning system and has received a new commission which brings back sounds from her past.
I've been working on these new pieces for organ with this organ at the Orgel Park in Amsterdam that is tuned in a temperament from around 1470 called Pietro Auron. I working on those pieces and finding a lot of solace in that temperament. But then I've also been applying those pieces on various mean tone tempered organs as well, and just sort of spending time with them, trying to learn from them, figure out what they mean. There's something about these compositions that in the way that I write them isn't in a linear way of figuring out, oh, this is what I want to express. As if you were writing a song with lyrics, there's generally that kind of cognitive awareness when you approach things with words, but approaching things instrumentally and also using kind of rigid structures that are seemingly objective structures, which you decide that help you make decisions. That, I don't know, there's sort of this discovery process where I have to sit with the music for a very long time before understanding the identity of it and the what it's trying to teach me. So those are those organ pieces I'm working on. Yeah, they're very close to me right now. And the choral pieces, I was so grateful to receive this commission for the Macadam Ensemble. They're a very talented French vocal ensemble with their expertise in early music. And it felt sort of like the perfect colliding of my interest in vocal music, which has been very subdued since I moved to Sweden, and kind of connecting back to my roots of vocal music and my roots of poetry as well, that I haven't really been focusing on for the last 6 or 7 years.
The complete composition for the Macadam Ensemble is now viewable online for a limited time in a haunting video you can find linked on our website and social media pages. Kali Malone's meticulous and complicated compositional methods may seem to be at odds with the sublime simplicity many people hear in her music. The sound shares so many qualities with mind-clearing meditative practice, yet seems to be the product of a very active brain. It's in the transition from composition to performance that the work manages to blend these two and achieve the depth that people love when they hear it. The precise performance instructions leave no room for gushy emotional playing, causing the performer and audience alike to share in the work's apparent self-creation. Thank you to Kali Malone for joining us on FutureStops. If you'd like to learn more about her work, all of the links and info can be found on our social media pages. That's YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Remember to subscribe to the FutureStops podcast and those social accounts and join our community. FutureStops is a podcast from the Royal Canadian College of Organists, produced by Andrew O'Connor, with Haley Raymond as community manager and executive producer Elizabeth Shannon. I'm your host, Blake Hargreaves. Thanks for listening.